Welcome to Consumer Law, What Is It Good For?, where we look at, consider and try to answer common questions put to us here at Stormcatcher Law through our legal advice helpline and from clients. And today's question comes from a number of sources, but one in particular, who I shall refer to as Jay. And Jay says, I bought a faulty car which has had substantial but poorly repaired accident damage. And before buying it, I was told by the dealer that the car is HPI clear, has been serviced, has been thoroughly checked, and the vehicles are prepared to a very high standard and is in great condition inside and out. And the dealer says, in response, that the vehicle was advertised as HPI clear, and as evidenced by the attached HPI report, this remains accurate. And Jay wants to know, what are my rights? So this question is all about misselling and misleading. The background to this question, as I said, comes from a number of different sources, but two in particular, one involving a Mercedes-Benz and the other involving a BMW. In fact, there were several BMWs in the last couple of weeks. These people bought their vehicles because of the thorough checks the dealer said the vehicles had passed. And subsequently, in the case of the Mercedes, the questioner discovered that the vehicle had been poorly repaired. There's evidence of most of the car having been poorly repaired and resprayed. There's overspray here, there and everywhere, poor repairs on the rear quarter. One of the wheels has been welded. And in the other case, involving the BMW, the buyer subsequently found out when he went to sell the car through We Buy Any Car that it had previously been sold through a salvage auction, albeit as unrecorded, and that has significantly affected the value of that car by around £8,000 to £9,000. All the sellers, all the car dealers, decline liability in reliance upon the fact that they said the vehicles are HPI clear, and they are. So the question is simply, can a car dealer be held liable for telling the truth? And the answer to that is yes, and I'm going to explain why. So if we were to Google the definition of misrepresentation, it would say something like this, that the usual rule in misrepresentation is that a person will be liable for giving a false statement of fact which the buyer relied on in entering the contract to buy the car. This leads car dealerships in general to believe that as long as they don't lie, they're in the clear. So in this case, for example, the dealer said the car is HPI clear, and the HPI report proves that's true. And this is why the Wikipedia version of misrepresentation is overly simplistic. And let me explain why. If we use the example of misrepresentation by conduct, and we use the example of the film, which is now over 20 years old, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, called Catch Me If You Can, and he dresses up like an airline pilot. He dresses up, I think, in a doctor's outfit and then pretends he's a lawyer. So he actually doesn't do much apart from going around giving the false impression that he belongs to those impressions. That's misrepresentation by conduct. There is no statement of fact, as Wikipedia referred. There's another aspect of misrepresentation, which is partial disclosure, or half-truths, as it's called. For example, if a car dealer were to say that we've checked the car over and the engine runs like a dream. Well, given that the gearbox is attached to the engine and crucial to harness the power of the engine in order to give it the full momentum it requires, it must be implicit if the engine runs like a dream, then the gearbox must also run like a dream. And if it doesn't, there may be a form of misrepresentation. There's also a possibility that liability can arise in circumstances where the overall presentation of the vehicle or the information relating to it, or the seller, like Leonardo DiCaprio, or anything else relevant to the buying decision may or is likely to deceive the average consumer. So crucially, this includes reference to information which, although is true, is presented in a misleading way. And this is what we call misselling. Misselling is governed, or at least formally, by a piece of law called the Consumer Protection for Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, and that's been replaced in May 2025 by the new Digital Markets Competitions and Consumer Act 2024. And essentially, what that says is that you could potentially have circumstances where you have a series of facts which, when put together, which are true, but when put together, give a false impression. So let's have a look at applying the law to the facts from our questionnaire. So the first thing we've got to consider in the case of the sale is, what is the impression the dealership is trying to create by making those statements? So let's have a quick look at that. The words HPI clear, what does that mean? HPI is a firm which just simply holds and sells data. And that data is supplied to it by third parties, including finance companies to record whether there's finance outstanding, or the police, whether the vehicle is stolen. That also can come from insurance companies, whether there's a mileage discrepancy, and whether or not the vehicle has been previously written off by an insurance company and sold as salvage. Importantly, the HPI terms and conditions, which I'll read from, say the information we supply includes data supplied to us from a number of third-party sources which we do not warrant as being accurate. So simply, HPI hold information given to them by other parties, but they don't check it. Therefore, to say the vehicle is HPI clear means that there is no negative information in relation to finance, theft, or write-offs held on the HPI database. It does not mean that the vehicle has not sustained accident damage. It does not mean that the vehicle has not sustained accident damage significant enough to write it off had there been an insurance claim. So therefore, in describing the car as HPI clear, could give the false impression that there's nothing about the vehicle which, if known, would have affected yours or the questioner's decision to buy the car. And that is misleading. If we then add that to the context of the other statements, that's to say that the vehicle has been serviced, it's been thoroughly checked, the vehicles are prepared to a very high standard, and it's in great condition inside and out. Whilst lots of people, including some lawyers, will say these are just statements of opinion, and statements of opinions cannot be held as misrepresentations. But what is the case is that together it does give the impression that somebody, a professional, has inspected this vehicle inside and out. It's carried out all of those checks. It's passed an MOT, so it's roadworthy. It's been through its pre-delivery inspection. It's been serviced, so they've been up and around it, changed the oil, the filter, had a proper look over it, and so on and so forth. And it's given the false impression that it's not quite perfect, but it's definitely free from any significant faults, and there's just nothing that would put you off. Or if there was something found that may put you off if you knew about it, that it's been rectified as part of the preparation to getting it up to this high standard which the dealer talks about. So putting these all together, these what appear to be fairly innocuous sentences give a impression of quality and higher quality than the average, because the car dealer is attempting to set him or herself apart from other people by setting the standard. It gives an impression of reliability. It also gives them the impression that the dealer is trustworthy. We've checked everything, so you don't have to. And that also gives the impression of peace of mind. don't worry, there's going to be no foreseeable issues in terms of maintenance and otherwise because we've taken care of it. It's serviced, been MOT'd, nothing to worry about for the next 12 months. So, but in looking at the current case, the case of the Mercedes, just by looking at the photographs that the person sent in, the seller must have known the vehicle had undergone huge amounts of work. It had paintwork all round it and signs of very poor repairs. You could see the signs of the filler. It was obvious. And the paintwork that had been carried out was awful, micro blistering round it. So there's no doubt at all that a professional would have noticed that. And that does start to give rise to ideas of dishonesty, which is another aspect. We would not consider the repairs that have been carried out to be a mark of quality. And there's no chance at all that this vehicle has given the buyer any peace of mind because almost from the get-go, the engine management lights come on. There's been no end of issues trying to rectify it. And it appears to be crabbing from the rear. Now, given this car's a front-wheel drive, that gives us some concern that perhaps the rear damage to the rear quarter has caused some structural damage. And the bottom line is that the buyer would not have bought the vehicle had she known the truth. And because of this altogether, it's fair to say that the person has been misled and the vehicle has been missold, and the lady should be entitled to her money back because she found those problems and discovered the misleading actions within 90 days as set out by the law that I mentioned. So entitled to money back along with damages, cost and otherwise. Had she been outside that 90-day period, it's likely that under the law that she would be entitled to a partial refund or some discount and damages. But of course, the alternative, if it were found that the person or the dealer was dishonest, then of course there'd be a case for misrepresentation, and that would still entitle the buyer to rescission, to reject the car and get their money back. In the case of the BMW, for which there's no physical signs really of accident damage or collision damage, but it's undoubtedly was sold, I think, through Copart or another large auction house as unrecorded salvage. The fact that that's even mentioned and that data is so readily available now undoubtedly put We Buy Any Car off and caused them to half pretty much the value. And that was mirrored when the chap went off to sell the car to a dealership. Of course, they used exactly the same resources. And again, well, the dealership didn't want to buy it at all, let alone at £8,000 or £9,000 less. And because of that, contrary to the belief of the dealer, in my view, they're going to be liable. So I hope this video has been useful, all about mis-selling and misleading actions by car dealers. If you have any questions, you can give us a call on 0333 700 7676, or you can email us at knowledge@stormcatcher.co.uk.